It's time for the best coverage of the top stories in sports. The Sports Wrap with Jason Page starts now.
Welcome to this Tuesday edition of the show. Lots to do over the next 60 minutes, including a conversation with Dennis Bernstein of SiriusXM NHL Radio and thefourthperiod.com. Find out what's going on in the NHL postseason. How about them Dallas Stars? Thoughts of their demise may have been greatly exaggerated. We'll talk about that with him. Also, be joined by Mary Kay Cabot coming up in about 10 minutes. Get some thoughts with her on the Browns draft, the decision to punt on Travis Hunter, the decision to draft Shedeur Sanders, all of that coming up with the great Mary Kay Cabot of the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. But we start things out in the NBA, and Sam Yarnell is here. Look, before these playoffs started, I said this about both of these teams, and it has come to pass in both series, that the Rockets and Pistons, the biggest thing working against them was you don't know what you don't know. And in the case of the Pistons, while they do have some veteran presence on that team that has certainly helped, against the Knicks, you still have a bunch of guys that have never been in the postseason. And you don't know what you don't know. And in the case of the Rockets, we saw it again here, in this series where you can make the argument the Rockets and Warriors are pretty damn even, on the court when you talk about talent. You feel good about the Rockets when you talk about coaching with Ime Udoka, although Steve Kerr is obviously no slouch. But ultimately, experience matters. And we're finding that out in this postseason, Sam, where yet again, the Rockets down the stretch last night, and man alive, can you make some free? Were they 12 of 21 from the free throw line in a game where you lose by 3? Jimmy Butler's making all of his free throws on a night where you shut down Stephen Curry. Podziemski goes off and has a big night, and the Warriors just find a way to take a 3-1 series lead. Both they and the Knicks have these 3-1 series leads, and it just goes to show how much experience matters.
Yeah, and I promise we're not going to give any amount of time to the Cavs and Heat on the show today because that shouldn't have even been a playoff series, and the Heat shouldn't have even been in the playoffs. Thanks, Adam Silver, for making that great thing called the play-in, because a week of good basketball is definitely worth 2 weeks of horrible basketball. Not. Here's the thing with this. I completely agree with you, Jason, when it comes to the Houston Rockets in this situation. Last night, and you hit the nail on the head there at the end, free throws killed this team, and free throws in a visitor's building, in a tense atmosphere, in a playoff atmosphere, around a group of fans that have been to the playoffs about a bazillion times before. Yeah, that is where you're going to make your money in the playoffs. You are exactly right. That is what is going to set this Rockets team apart from being a championship contender. And quite frankly, if they're doing this in the first round against Golden State, if you have any ticket on Houston to win the West, just cash out of it right now. Whatever the number is,
$7.
Just cash out of it right now. Take something back from the book. This game last night was wild. And to your point about experience, I found myself right after the game ended, and they were doing media with Draymond on the court, I believe. I think it was Allie LaForce doing the interview on the sidelines with Draymond Green. And I thought to myself, and he was holding his kid, and I thought to myself, man, look at all the gray in Draymond Green's beard. Like, that gray is nothing but the stress of being in the playoffs and being a championship contender every year. Think back to the 2016 Warriors and how young Draymond Green looked. And now, just 9 years later, the guy looks about 25 years older. That's what playing in the playoffs will do to you, folks,
it's
every single year. But it'll also make you a lot better than a team led by Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, who have combined for less than the amount of time that we've seen since the 2016 Warriors in the NBA. This series is just as good as lost for me for the Houston Rockets, and it's because of exactly that, Jason.
And there's one more thing we got to talk about, and it's Jalen Green. Jalen Green. Look, games 1 and 4 of this series, he simply did not show up. And when you talk about, when you do the postmortem on this Rockets season, which is fast approaching here, Cancun, here we come. 25 minutes, 3 of 8, 8 points, not even on the floor in some of the key moments of this game, where Ime Udoka just basically couldn't have him out there. I was listening to the Rockets radio broadcast coming home last night, and this was the Rockets home announcers saying he didn't even look like he belonged on the floor. He was non-competitive in those 25 minutes. And that is something that has to be very alarming for this team, because a lot of people like to think, he's sort of that linchpin guy. He could be sort of that guy that, takes this team to the next level at some point. And when you watch this postseason, I just don't see it.
I do think, though, that as much as that it really is bad for the Rockets organization, they have found, at least against the Warriors, something that is incredibly successful in running that too big set, because they'll just throw Steven Adams in there and make Şengün run the 4, or Steven Adams run the 4 for that matter, and bump everyone back 1. That'll work, right, to an extent. It's not going to work through 2 rounds of the playoffs. Maybe it'll get you past the Golden State Warriors in 7. Potentially you can make some miraculous comeback. But then again, you're playing a 7-game series in the first round, and you're going to be incredibly tired going into a second round where you're probably not going to be playing somebody who played in a 7-game series. So, it sucks. It really does for the Houston Rockets, because
it's part of the process, though. But it's part of the process. We see teams have to go through this.
Jalen Green is not a bad player. We can't let people think that, because he plays 3 bad games in a row in the playoffs, he's all of a sudden a bad player. He's still a cornerstone to their franchise. He's just got to figure it out as he's exiting his youths, how to play in these clutch time moments.
Say this, too, about the Warriors, man. And look, I made the point, I don't know if it was yesterday on the show, I made the point that you're trying to extend this window as long as you can if you're the Warriors. And it's great. Jimmy Butler did exactly what you went and got him to do on a night where he clearly still wasn't 100%, where the back is going to be an issue. And I'll say this, too. It is imperative that this team get this thing wrapped up in 5. Because they got to get him some rest, because that back's not going to get any better here. Playing through the next couple weeks, assuming the Warriors are playing for the next couple of weeks, they've got to get him some rest if they're to make any deep run in this postseason. All right, move away from the NBA. Mary Kay Cabot is coming up on the other side. Thoughts with her on the Browns draft, Shedeur Sanders, and more next. And this Tuesday edition of the show continues. We talked about the Browns plenty yesterday with our friend Diana Rossini from The Athletic. Today, let's get a little more in depth on the Browns. Talk with the great Mary Kay Cabot, the preeminently qualified Mary Kay Cabot, I like to say. With the Plain Dealer, Cleveland.com. She's covered the Browns for a long time. What was your reaction to this draft? Start with the decision to punt on Travis Hunter and trade down and go get some more help for the defensive line, to the Shedeur Sanders decision. What was your overall take on this draft for the Browns?
I thought it was a great draft. I really did. I was shocked about coming back up to get Shedeur in the 5th round, although 10 minutes before it happened, I turned to my colleague next to me and I said, I bet you Andrew's going to draft Shedeur here. But I didn't think they would actually trade up. I was waiting for 166 to come along at that time. So I was shocked about that to a degree. I was not shocked that they traded out of the pick. I had an inkling that that was going to happen. And I was not shocked about Dylan Gabriel. I kind of also had an inkling that that was going to happen. So I think when you look at trading away from Travis Hunter, if you look at it globally, in the moment, I'm sure a lot of Browns fans were like, meh.
That's how I felt about it.
With a defensive tackle. But then you look at the whole thing. just in this weekend alone, they used 2 picks from that trade to completely overhaul their running game with Quinshawn Judkins and Dylan Sampson. So they'll have a very robust running game out of this draft. And then they also moved down only 3 spaces to pick up a 2 and a 4 this year and a first rounder next year. And they got what everyone widely agreed was a top 5 pick in this draft in Mason Graham. So I just don't have a huge problem with the trade at all. Now they're set up next year to go get themselves a quarterback in what should be a better quarterback class in the event they need to get one.
All right, but we have to talk about this current quarterback room, because to me it feels like it's made for a reality show. And as we talked about with Diana yesterday, it's interesting because they all have such different stories. There's so many different storylines surrounding each of these guys. It's going to make for a fascinating quarterback room. Do you get the sense that it's truly a wide open competition, or is this Joe Flacco's team until he gives them reason not to believe it is?
No, I've never believed it was Joe Flacco's team. I've been saying all along that if the season started tomorrow, it would be Kenny Pickett.
Wow.
They brought Kenny Pickett in here to compete for that starting job, and he was one of the first moves they made, if not the first move they made, when the league opened for business in March. So they went after him right away. They identified him as someone that they felt was that next quarterback who could get into a new system, get into a new environment, and perhaps do better than he did in his previous stop, and that being mostly the Steelers, not just his 1 year with the Eagles. So I think they have high hopes for Kenny Pickett. They're excited about what he brings to the table. And then you look at, yes, it's going to be very interesting, and I think it would make a great reality show. And then you bring in Joe Flacco, who is the absolute slam dunk, hands down fan favorite. He went 4-1 here in 2023, took them to the playoffs. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. And then again, they liked Dylan Gabriel better than they liked Shedeur Sanders. So he's got to be up there somewhere in the mix. And then you've got Shedeur, who is going to have to come in here and really prove himself. Not to mention, Deshaun Watson is still in the building, hanging around, rehabbing his re-torn Achilles. So it's quite the quarterback room. And I do think that it would make a phenomenal reality show throughout the offseason.
It's going to be hard just to get these guys enough time on the field. If you think about having this many quarterbacks and guys that, are expected to play, it's going to be hard just to get these guys enough time out there to try and figure out which one is the best.
Well, the Browns always go into training camp with 4 quarterbacks. So this is no different than that. But the difference is a quarterback competition. Usually you know who's getting the bulk of the first team reps. So that is the whole key. They always have 4 arms, 4 camp arms, 4 guys out there vying and trying to do what they can do. So that's nothing new. It's just that now you've got to get 1 or 2 of them really seriously ready to start the season as fast as possible. And I'll tell you, I have seen that the May practices, the OTAs, it really does start there in this offseason program if you want to get up to speed in a hurry.
What does all of this mean for Nick Chubb?
I wrote a little bit about this yesterday. Since they did overhaul the running game with Quinshawn Judkins and Dylan Sampson, right now, in this very moment, there is not a place for Nick Chubb on this football team. But there could become a place on this team depending on what happens with Jerome Ford. If someone makes them an offer that they can't refuse for Jerome, I think that's sort of the linchpin there. If they can figure that out, then then they might be able to find a spot or a place for Nick. But keep in mind, it doesn't mean that Nick is necessarily going to come in here and get a bunch of carries or even be active every week on game day, because Quinshawn is going to be the bell cow, and then you've got your changeup hitter there in Dylan Sampson. So it really is. At the beginning of free agency, I wrote that it was like the end of the Nick Chubb era, and I got a lot of pushback on that, and people were very, very upset with me. But for all intents and purposes, it really is that.
Deontay Johnson, is this just the case of the Browns, like so many other teams that have, just sort of taking a flyer and seeing what Deontay Johnson still has?
I think so, but it is a little bit head scratching to me because if in your last three stops or so it didn't work out and they didn't want you in the building, then I think that really should give the Browns pause. So I'm not exactly sure why they think Deontay Johnson isn't going to be a problem here, or if they think they can get him in this environment with this football team and this coaching staff and this wide receivers coach and get something out of him that these other teams have not been able to do. We know what a great organization the Ravens are, and it didn't work out there. So we'll have to see how this goes. But, it would be nice to see another receiver in here who didn't come with all the baggage.
Was Jimmy Haslam involved in the Shedeur Sanders decision?
I don't think so. They probably bounced it off of him. He was in the room, but he doesn't come up with these ideas. He's not the personnel guy. That's Andrew Berry's job. Everyone likes to kind of spin the narrative that Jimmy's calling the shots. He's not calling the shots. This was not his idea. I really don't think that it was. I know that everybody's going to want to put that out there, but I'm just not buying it.
Well, look, I mean, they made a lot of moves in this draft, and we know they were good and have been a good team defensively. Hopefully they can cobble together enough offense in 2025. We'll see what the Browns do. Mary Kay Cabot, I always appreciate you. The Plain Dealer in Cleveland and Cleveland.com. Let's do it again soon. Be well.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
We're coming back with more Sports Wrap on this Tuesday. Don't you go anywhere. Welcome back to the show. Let's talk NHL playoffs with Dennis Bernstein of SiriusXM NHL Radio. Stars lead the Avalanche 3-2. Dennis, what's it all about?
Look, if they had Miro Heiskanen, I might have picked them to win. Who's their best defenseman who's out with a knee injury. When he gets back in the next round, assuming they go on, then they got to be one of the short favorites to win it all. They're playing that great.
Wow.
And that's without Jason Robertson, who's a 35-goal scorer. But Tyler Seguin comes back in, gets a couple of goals. This is a deep, dangerous team who's well coached and has a great general manager, Jim Nell. They were one of the favorites coming in, but the way they're playing now, Jason, against this team, and you and I both agree that's a great team they're playing. It's very, very impressive work by the Dallas Stars.
Wow, you think they can go all the way?
Yeah, no question.
Wow.
I love the depth. I love their size on the defense. And Heiskanen gets back. He's a future Norris Trophy winner, which is the player who wins the best defensive player in the league. Yeah, I think they can because it's iron sharpen iron. Anybody that comes out of the Central, Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg, what you'll have to walk through in 2 rounds. We'll certainly prep you for anything in the West, or certainly anybody coming out of the East.
Florida doubles up Tampa Bay on Monday night, 4-2 the final there. Panthers reestablish control of that series as they get a win on their home ice, lead it 3-1. What stood out to you from that Panthers effort, especially after they dropped Game 3 of that series?
He's not been talked a lot in this series, and he never is talked about a lot when you have guys like Barkov and Sam Leinhart. But you remember, this guy was the first overall pick. Aaron Ekblad's impact, and I mean that physically and legitimately. The way he hit Pago last night, knocked him out of the game, scored a goal last night. That's been really, really impressive. But I know there's been a narrative, and I added into it, that the Panthers look like down the stretch of the season, Jason, they didn't play. They were just playing too much hockey, and they were exhausted. They're not exhausted anymore. They're on the verge. They came down 2-1 at home in the third period. They get those 2 quick goals from the Tampa Bay Lightning. They bounce back and get 2 quick goals. This now looks like the team that won the championship, and that's with Barkov being out after getting hit. So yeah, it's a different team, Jason, but it's a damn good team. And I know there's some Leaf fans chanting up in Toronto, "We want the Panthers." Well, that didn't work last year, and I wouldn't be chanting for it this year either.
Before I get to this Kings-Oilers series, which I know you've been covering pretty intimately, I want to get your thoughts on what we've seen with Winnipeg and the level of panic there has to be right now with what's happened with Connor Hellebuyck here over the last couple of games, and the Jets really looking like a team that's in trouble.
Yeah, well, there's some people, not a lot, but some people clamoring for Eric Comrie in net for Game 5, not Connor Hellebuyck, who's going to win the Vezina Trophy. Jason, I think his save percentage is like 825 or 8, and for people that don't know, casual fans, 900's an average save percentage. He's been bad. He's been bad again. He hasn't been good in the playoffs since 2018. Now, I will say this: when there's constant traffic in front of any goaltender in the playoffs. He's not going to save 95% of the shots. And that's the problem, is that the Vegas Golden Knights have a big defense. They block shots. Winnipeg's very talented. They're the best team in the league this year, but they don't have an oversized defense. They have one kid, Logan Stanley. They didn't have the ability to get St. Louis out of the dangerous spots in front of the net. They're not blocking shots. So as much as you want to hang this on Connor Hellebuyck, I always say, unless you're giving up really, really soft goals, you have to defend and better in front of them. They're missing a couple of guys in Nick Ehlers and Gabe Velarde, but they're up front. So it's a mystery. But you know what, Jason? You know what happens in sports? If you don't do the job, the narrative will continue. If they get beat by the Blues, and they very may well be, I'm still going with Winnipeg in 7 here. But at some point, Connor Hellebuyck doesn't even have to steal a game. Play decently. So the narrative isn't there that when O'Neill goes out there after every game, he's got to answer a question about a goaltender you would never think you'd have to answer questions about.
Let's talk about this Oilers-Kings series, which heads back to Los Angeles for tonight's Game 5 matchup with the Oilers and Kings tied at 2 games apiece. You made some news in the post-game presser after Game 4 with this question to Kings head coach Jim Hiller. People, will take a listen.
Jim, how do you change your approach in the third period to better close out games?
How do I change it? Next question, please. We're that far away on the empty net. Q chips that one out. Bouchard makes a good play. We're not even talking about this. So, how about that?
Sentiment in the room was that the first 40 minutes.
That's your favorite question, too, by the way.
Happened 3 times.
Maybe you got some ideas for me.
Now, what's interesting there is people probably couldn't hear when he said, it's your favorite question. You said, and people couldn't hear it because the mic wasn't in front of you at that point. You said, it's happened 3 times. And which he responds, you got any suggestions? All right, Dennis, you didn't get to answer it there. Tell me, what are your suggestions?
You want to go back to beat me being like Pat Leonard and John Tortorella in New York back in the day? Stop coaching, Pat. How about you play the same way in the third period that you did in the first 2 periods? Lack of aggression. You're going to stand up at the blue line and try to stop Connor McDavid? They had the lead. They've given up, to say you shouldn't change it, they've given up 10 goals in the third period of games 1, 3, and 4. And you don't think you need to change, all right? And here's the thing about that. Look, he answered the question. He's been a different guy since the playoffs started. And it happens with a lot of coaches. They go into playoff mode, bunker mentality, whatever. But then they come back at me like that, when I didn't even answer a question. I have a great relationship with the coach. It looks like a rookie coach whose team is failing in the playoffs. And here's the thing. It's not even about him. Let me give you this, Jason, right? Because I would say, be more aggressive. If you're up 3-1, push it. Edmonton's not a good defensive team. Keeps pushing the issue. But here's the thing. And NHL Network was talking about it, Mike Rupp and Brian Bill, who are former players. And Rupper made a great point. If you're Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid and you see that interview, what are you saying to yourself? We got him. We got this team.
Yeah.
We can. Yeah. There's got to be a lot of doubt in the room. I know there's tension. I know there's stress because this is the 4th consecutive time you've played this team. You had them on the ropes. They had to win 4 out of 5 to beat you. You were going to slay this dragon, and now, who knows?
Yeah.
It's a brand new series. It's 2-2. The Kings do have 2 home games. But that's the concern, is that it's not even about your room. You just gave them bullet board material. You don't think Chris Novak suddenly seemed like, look at this, look the way my counterpart's reacting here on a benign question, Jason.
It was
They're
a benign
bad in the
question.
third periods. It was a benign question. It wasn't, what are you doing? What does your team need to do? So it was disappointing in a big spot that's how you would respond.
Dennis Bernstein, SiriusXM NHL Radio and thefourthperiod.com. I appreciate you, my friend. We'll keep watching and enjoying that series. Has been one of the better ones in this postseason. Thank you, sir.
It was a pleasure, JP. Thanks for the time.
We're coming back. All right, let's take it to segment 4. Thanks again to Dennis Bernstein for hanging out from thefourthperiod.com. SiriusXM NHL Radio. There's a lot going on around the NFL. Draft, post-draft. The questions on Aaron Rodgers continue to swirl. And it just seems like the Steelers have taken the approach here of, we'll wait. We'll on your timetable, Aaron Rodgers. And to me, Sam, it calls to mind an organization that reeks a little of desperation. That you have basically put your 2025 season in the hands of a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers that's kind of floating through life. I don't know what I want to do. I'm throwing with DK Metcalf. I'm hanging out at the beach. And it also calls to mind this. And I think everybody in life can relate to this. We've all had these relationships at some point in our life. You're a man dating a woman dating a man, whatever it may be. And you get into a relationship. And the first few months and few years are amazing. And then marriage, kids, life starts to take its toll. And the relationship starts to sort of hit a hamster wheel. It's got its certain things, you know. Monday nights we get together and have dinner with the family. And Tuesday nights it's pot roast. And Wednesday nights it's sandwich night. And Thursday night. And every week is the same. And every Friday night you go out to that diner. And it's great. And week after week, it just settles into sort of a rhythm and a path and a habit. And it feels like the Steelers, to me, have become that stale relationship where there's no excitement, where, it's good. It's okay. You know, somebody asks you, how's your marriage? How's things going at home? You're like, it's all right. You know, I can't complain. That's sort of what the Steelers have become. They are the NFL's equivalent of that monotonous sort of day-to-day relationship that has no exciting. It doesn't have any excitement. Maybe you go on a vacation once a year. It's great. That's what the Pittsburgh Steelers as an organization have become. You know, as a fan, you could expect they're going to make the playoffs. You know, as a fan, they're going to win some games during the regular season. You know, they're going to play hard-nosed football. You know, Mike Tomlin's going to have his team prepared. But that's sort of what it's been for a number of years. And you get the sense that unless something drastic changes, and that means Mike Tomlin going, it means having to suck for a few years while you figure it out, because that's what most franchises have to go through, that it's just going to be that monotonous, boring relationship. The NFL's version of that is what the Steelers are right now, Sam.
Yeah, football purgatory is the term that I've, started to use for the Pittsburgh Steelers, much like basketball purgatory, where the Washington Wizards, for a completely different reason, were for many years in the NBA.
That's hell.
Here's the thing. The Pittsburgh Steelers is a franchise that since 2020 has not won more than 10 games and has not won less than 9 games.
Isn't that amazing?
That is not a winning recipe in the NFL in 2025. It's just not. And, we had Diane on the show yesterday, and she said that they're acting calmly. There are two elements to this, right? The Aaron Rodgers side of it, to me, is that the fact of the matter is always going to be this. The Pittsburgh Steelers are one of, probably number 2, the most storied franchise in National Football League history. Under an owner that has owned them, since my grandparents were kids. They're a team that's had 3. What's the stat, Jason? We've discussed it so often during football season. I just don't have it in front of me. 3 head coaches in the last 40 years,
Yes.
50 years, something like that. One of the names of being what the Pittsburgh Steelers are is operating kind of under this condition of calmness and this condition of it's all going to be all right. We don't need to do anything drastic because we're just kind of par for the course. And we've reached an era in the NFL where par for the course doesn't really get you a whole lot. You need example one of that. Look at the freaking Buffalo Bills over the course of the last, 7 years now. Par for the course doesn't get you a ring. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are in the business of filling their fingers with rings, which when you're staring down the barrel of a decade plus, as again, the Pittsburgh Steelers are, without having even been to one of those, it's going to start to become problematic sooner rather than later. The problem is when you have all these people who we were just talking about who are dinosaurs at the very top of the top, they're not going to understand that in the modern day and age of the NFL, change is really what breeds winning.
They're the St. Louis Cardinals. They're the Minnesota Twins. They're, hey, win some games, make the playoffs, lose in the playoffs, wash, rinse, repeat. And again, it's, hey, honey, how was your day? It's great. Want to have dinner? Sure. Want to watch Jeopardy? Sure. Okay. Night, honey. Night, honey. Click.
I got a good one for you.
Yeah.
They are the Chicago Bulls. Jerry Reinsdorf might as well own them because all they do is finish slightly above 500, make the playoffs, bow right out.
Yeah.
Makes a ton of money.
It does. Rabid fan base. They'll always be supportive. Ingrained in the community. Meh. Shoulder shrug. We're coming back. Odds and Ends wraps it up in 10 minutes. Let's talk some baseball. Here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Brandon Nimmo. What'd they say? He was the 5th Major League Baseball player to have 9 RBIs after the 5th inning. I think if I saw the stat correctly, Sam. And the Mets look, I mean, I know they had a rough weekend against the Nationals and blew some games. Yankees and Mets both having issues on the back end of the bullpen. Devin Williams has been terrible for the Yankees, and we haven't talked about it enough. But I'm okay with that because I don't want to be in a bad mood, Sam. I don't want to be in a bad mood. Not going to talk about the fact that you went and spent all this money on Devin Williams, and he can't suck enough right now. Not going to talk about it. I'm going to do my Nick Turturro explosion here on the show. I'm kind of surprised. Nobody in the Mets franchise history has ever had 10 RBIs in a game for as long as that franchise has been around. That somebody didn't have 10. Yes. All right. Okay.
Sorry, I had to unzip my lips. I had to zip up there for a second because it was really hard for me to not mention the fact that I'm in the belly of the beast and all these people believe in Luke Weaver. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we doing, people? Have you never watched Luke Weaver pitch before? He just gave all this money to this closer, and now we're on April 28th, and he's already not the closer. Anyway, to the Mets. Yeah, the Mets are cool.
I just want you to do that again.
To me, gosh, I'm going to be so right about this in a couple of months. There is something just screaming, and I mean hollering, that the New York Mets this season, maybe harder than even the Scherzer-Verlander season, they are going to Met so hard.
They're 20-9. Where are you coming up with this?
Look at their external metrics. Francisco Lindor is one of the streakiest hitters in Major League Baseball. Nobody in New York is happy with Juan Soto, and it's hilarious. As a Nationals fan, I'm just like sitting here eating my popcorn while these Yankee fans are chirping these Met fans, and these Met fans are clearly mad about it because Juan Soto is not producing the way a 780 whatever million dollar player should be.
He's hitting 257, not 157. It isn't that
definitely.
bad yet.
His WRC plus is 120. He's like 20% better. Or I'm sorry, his OPS plus. He's 20% better than a league average hitter. He's above average, which is great. But Met fans, I'll tell you, they are up in arms that the guy's not pacing with Aaron Judge right now. Again, hilarious. I'm just sitting here eating my popcorn, watching it all fall apart because, my gosh, I can see it coming from a mile away. Folks, what do we talk about so often in baseball? Sustainability. What is the reason that the Mets have reached this crazy record that Jason mentioned, 20-9? Because their pitching has been the best in Major League Baseball. What was the big narrative with the Mets coming into the season? They've got every bat, but they're going to have to win games 9-8 because they have no pitching. I got news for you. That's going to catch up to them. And when it does, it's going to come really quick.
Sam's really excited about the prospect of the Mets just imploding. You might have
Every
to wait
year,
a while.
man, it's like
you might
clockwork.
have to wait a while though, and here's the reason why. You mentioned that pitching. That buys you time to get bats right. The fact that they're 20-9 and Soto isn't really doing anything big yet for this team is, and look, we keep talking about it. Pete Alonso's having a phenomenal season. He is still, and as much as you want to talk about what Soto isn't doing, he's still helping the guys around him get better pitches. And, you know, as long as he's healthy and in the lineup, even if he's hitting 250 right now, you know at some point he's going to heat up. You know at some point he's going to get comfortable in his new environment there with the Mets, and he's going to be fine. And you know, your pitching sort of sustains you right now. But I want to move away from the Mets for a second because there is other news from baseball, and it's something we have chronicled here on this show, and that is the looming decision for Rob Manfred to rule on this lifetime ban for Pete Rose, and whether or not that gets lifted now that he has passed away, which would open the door then for Pete Rose to be potentially voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, the fact that Rob Manfred, I mean, there are so many things we can go after Rob Manfred for, but the fact that Rob Manfred said on Monday at a meeting with the Associated Press that he and Donald Trump have discussed several issues surrounding baseball, Cuba, Venezuela, players coming from those countries, but that Pete Rose is part of that conversation. Look, I'm not going to get like hyper political here, even though I could. What the hell does Donald Trump have to do with the idea of whether or not Pete Rose someday gets into the Hall of Fame? I don't understand. You're the commissioner of Major League Baseball. You're the grand poobah. You're the one that sits at the top of the heap. Make a decision. Decide what you're going to do. This is dragged on long enough. What is Rob Manfred doing, Sam Yarnell? Why is Donald Trump involved in it? You know, if you want to make the argument of Donald Trump helping live in the PGA Tour because of Donald Trump's, you know, sort of immersion into the world of golf, okay, I can deal with that. But on baseball? Really? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that there are a lot of different ways we could take this between the political sports realm that have seemed to have crashed over the course of the last 2 days. I don't really know what's going on because last time I checked in on that whole situation, it was shut up and dribble. So I just don't really understand the kind of dichotomy that we've got going on here. Is it shut up and dribble, or is it you're going to now decide who goes in the Hall of Fame? I'm confused.
And at some point, we're going to get a decision from Rob Manfred. I'm torn on it, to be honest. I don't like the idea of him going in posthumously. I thought he should have gone in while he was alive. We'll see how it plays out. Watch this space. Just about time to say goodbye on this Tuesday edition of the show. Wednesday means Kurt Heelan, pro basketball talk at NBCSports.com. We'll have him on the show tomorrow. Delve some more into this NBA postseason. By the way, Heat culture. You know when culture starts to suck? When your team sucks. And that's sort of where we are with the Miami Heat. I want to ask Kurt Heelan about that tomorrow because they looked low. I mean, my God. They'd lose by 53? 58? I don't know. Whatever it was. It was awful. So much so that we barely discussed it in the opening segment of the show. All right, couple of reminders. Sports Wrap with Jason Page, the podcast version of the show, available on all your favorite podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Odyssey, Amazon, anywhere you get a podcast. And if you go on Amazon to listen to the podcast, you will not see a listing that says the show costs this much because of tariffs. I promise you that. Also, I want to tell you about the Sports Wrap with Jason Page YouTube channel. It is fantastic. Everything you love about this show. The show itself is on there. We have Sports Wrap shorts. Yesterday, Damian Lillard. You found out from the Bucks that he was lost for the season with a torn Achilles. Boom! We had a Sports Wrap short on our YouTube channel. Every time news breaks, make sure to check out our Sports Wrap with Jason Page YouTube channel. Updated news there 24/7. Without any further delay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some odds and ends. Odds and ends, a new contract for George Kittle. Diana Rossini vindicated because she had talked about this for a while. 4 years, $76.4 million for George Kittle. And I have to say this, Sam. And look, we see this all the time in sports. It feels to me like you're paying for past production and not future earnings when you give George Kittle this kind of contract.
Yeah, it's the common baseball contract.
Yes.
You get paid for what you've done, not what you're going to do. I actually, full transparency, had a busy morning, and then in that break where doing my prep for the show, and then in that break where we just had, I was busy looking up how many people have been removed from the commissioner's ineligible list, and there are some crazy stories. When we go back to the Pete Rose thing, inevitably in a couple of weeks, because that's about how frequently you and I seem to talk about that on this show, I got some interesting facts for you, because I've been looking into that list, and wow. To the Kittle thing, I haven't had time to look at the salary cap table for the San Francisco 49ers, but you're coming up on having to pay Brock Purdy. You're giving you're giving George Kittle all this money. Gonna have to do something with Christian McCaffrey. Debo obviously already gone, so you got that off the books, but you're still going to have to worry about paying a wide receiver sooner rather than later. And oh, by the way, Ricky Pearsall didn't look that bad when healthy last season, so that contract's going to come up eventually. Oh, yeah, and let's not forget, you've also got one of the most diva-ridden offensive lines seemingly in the National Football League, so that's also going to definitely come into play with all of this. I say all that to say, it really feels like the San Francisco 49ers are trending towards irrelevancy in the NFL because of their cap. That's not to say that they were relevant last year. Frankly, they weren't. And then they lost a ton of pieces in the offseason. They're heading towards regression. They're heading towards rebuilding. But this is a really weird step in that direction.
I wanted to ask you, and I wasn't planning to talk about this, but what did you make of Brandon Beane lashing out at the guys over at WGR Radio in Buffalo yesterday about their reaction to his draft? Because he was pretty testy.
Yeah. So I do think that the Bills, not Sabres, but specifically in Buffalo, the Bills media space is a very, very toxic one and has become a very, very toxic one.
Say that for every market. You can say that for every market, though.
No. But I mean, specifically, its evolution over the course of the last 8 years has become incredibly toxic with the copious amounts of success that Josh Allen pretty much single-handedly has brought to that team. Brandon Beane, too. Don't get me wrong. I will stand on the fact that I think he is a top 3 GM in the National Football League. And go look at his draft record, go look at the contracts he's negotiated, and I think you'll probably agree with me. I totally understood where he was coming from. I think he had every right to defend himself. I think that every point that he made was incredible. The fact that they had one of, if not the most perfect, they scored more points than anybody in the National Football League last year. Across regular season and playoffs, throw the Philadelphia Eagles in there, who played an extra game, right? They still scored more points, the Buffalo Bills did. They had the best offense in the NFL last season, quite plainly and simply, and they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs because of their defense. And everyone seems to be mad that Brandon Beane went and drafted a bunch of defenders in this draft. I don't get it. It didn't make sense to me. Everyone in Buffalo has been so pass catcher happy since Stephon Diggs blessed them by coming to Buffalo, and now ever since he left, everyone's like, oh, how is Josh Allen going to survive without a wide receiver one? Guess what, folks? He just won the MVP without one, and it was his first MVP of his career. I didn't understand the narrative building from the Buffalo media, and that's not just to say WGR. Like, Cover One does it too. A bunch of the Bills podcasts do it too. It just seems like the success in Buffalo has lost a lot of their general ball knowledge. Not Nate Geary, though. That guy rocks.
You know what? Everybody a lot of times sports radio hosts in particular think it's like we live in a fantasy football world where you just go pluck guys and plug them in. It's not that easy. It's not that easy to piece together the puzzle of a roster. And Brandon Beane has done an outstanding job in Buffalo. And I'm not even a Buffalo Bills fan, but you have to acknowledge what he's done there has been second to none around the league. We're out of time. Thanks to Mary Kay Cabot, Dennis Bernstein. We'll see you all tomorrow.